the Jackson family heads out for a celebratory dinner in the town of Stone Creek. But their night takes a dark turn when they face blatant discrimination at the upscale Magnolia Grill. Just when things seem hopeless, an unexpected ally steps in, challenging not only the restaurant but the entire town to confront its deep-seated prejudices. How does one act of courage lead to a town's transformation? Watch to find out. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Let us know, what would you do in their situation? Hit the bell to catch more inspiring stories. It was a warm Friday evening in Stone Creek, the kind of late summer night that felt endless, with the sun casting its golden light over the town as it dipped below the horizon. The streets were alive with the sounds of laughter and chatter, as locals headed out to dinner, enjoying the weekend that had just begun. Stone Creek, with its quaint southern charm, was a close-knit community, the kind of place where everyone knew each other, or thought they did. But for one family, this night was about more than just the end of the work week. For the Jackson family, it was a night of celebration. Inside their modest home on the outskirts of town, Andrew Jackson was standing in front of the bedroom mirror, adjusting the knot on his tie. His reflection stared back at him, a mix of pride and quiet anxiety lingering in his eyes. Tonight marked a milestone in his career. After years of dedication and hard work, he had finally been promoted to senior regional manager at his accounting firm. It was a promotion that had been long overdue and one that Andrew had quietly hoped for, despite often being overlooked. For the first time in a long time, he felt like the sacrifices he had made were finally being acknowledged. "Looking good," came a voice from behind him. It was Carla, his wife, standing in the doorway with a soft smile on her face. She walked up to him, her hand gently smoothing down the lapel of his suit jacket. "Tonight's a big deal." Andrew smiled back at her, though the tension in his shoulders remained. "It is. I just want everything to go well tonight. We've been waiting for this for a long time." Carla could sense the unease in his voice. She knew how much this promotion meant to him, not just as a professional achievement, but as a validation of all the long hours he'd spent working late, the weekends he'd given up, and the times he'd quietly accepted being passed over for promotions in the past. Andrew had always been a steady, quiet force in their family, never complaining about the challenges he faced as a black man in a predominantly white corporate world. But tonight was different. Tonight was about celebrating the fruits of his labor. "It's going to be perfect," Carla assured him, leaning in to kiss his cheek. "We're going to celebrate, and nothing is going to ruin that. You deserve this, Andrew." He chuckled softly, the tension easing just a little. "I hope you're right." Downstairs, their two children were getting ready for the evening. Tiffany, their 15-year-old daughter, stood in front of the hallway mirror, applying the finishing touches to her makeup. She had inherited her mother's sharp features and confident demeanor, but also carried a spark of rebelliousness in her that often came with being a teenager. Jordan, 12 years old and quieter than his sister, was sitting on the couch, fidgeting with his dress shoes, looking less than thrilled about the evening ahead. "Mom's going to freak if you don't at least pretend to be excited for dinner," Tiffany teased, catching Jordan's reflection in the mirror as she applied a final swipe of lip gloss. "I am excited," Jordan muttered, though the lack of enthusiasm in his voice betrayed him. Tiffany rolled her eyes, but there was a hint of amusement in her expression. "Come on, Jordan. We're going to the Magnolia Grill. It's like the fanciest place in town. Plus, it's for Dad. Don't be such a downer." Jordan shrugged, staring down at his shoes. He knew tonight was important for their father, and in his own way, he was excited. But there was something about the evening that made him uneasy, though he couldn't quite put it into words. It wasn't the food or the restaurant, was the feeling that always lingered just beneath the surface when they went to places like the Magnolia Grill. The unspoken tension, the way people looked at them like they didn't belong. He didn't say anything about it, though. He didn't want to dampen the mood. Upstairs, Andrew and Carla finished getting ready, exchanging a quiet moment together before heading down to join the kids. "You ready for this?" Andrew asked, his voice softer now, as if trying to convince himself as much as her. Carla smiled, the kind of smile that had seen him through the highs and lows of their life together. More than ready. Let's go celebrate. As the family gathered at the front door, dressed in their best clothes, there was a sense of anticipation hanging in the air. It wasn't just about the meal or the promotion, it was about the moment. They were a family that had worked hard, sacrificed, and supported each other through everything. Tonight, they wanted to believe that they had arrived, that they could finally enjoy the rewards of their efforts without the weight of the world pressing down on them. The drive to the Magnolia Grill was filled with quiet excitement. Andrew kept his eyes on the road, but his mind wandered, replaying the events of the past few months. The long hours, the stress, the quiet moments of self-doubt. He had worked harder than anyone, and yet part of him still wondered if tonight would really be what he hoped it would. There was always that lingering fear of being reminded, in some subtle way, that no matter how hard you worked or how much you achieved, there were still spaces where people like him were seen as outsiders. The Magnolia Grill was located in the heart of downtown Stone Creek, its pristine white columns and elegantly lit façade standing as a beacon of sophistication. It was the kind of place where you made a reservation week in advance, where the waitstaff were impeccably dressed, and where the food was as much a work of art as it was a meal. For most families in Stone Creek, dining at the Magnolia Grill was a special occasion. For the Jacksons, it felt like a milestone. As they pulled up to the restaurant, Andrew felt a familiar twinge of nerves. It wasn't his first time at the Magnolia Grill, but every time he walked through those doors, there was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere, a reminder that places like this weren't always meant for people like him. "Ready?" Carla asked, sensing the slight tension in his posture. Andrew forced a smile, taking a deep breath. "Yeah, let's do this." The family stepped out of the car and made their way toward the entrance. The air was warm, the faint scent of jasmine lingering in the night as they approached the large wooden doors. Andrew held them open for Carla and the kids, offering a polite nod to a couple walking in behind them. They received a stiff nod in return, but no words were exchanged. Inside, the restaurant was just as grand as they remembered. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting a soft glow over the polished wood floors. The sound of quiet conversation filled the air, accompanied by the soft clinking of silverware on fine china. It was, by all appearances, the perfect setting for a celebratory dinner. But as the Jacksons approached the hostess stand, the mood shifted. A tall woman with blonde hair pulled back into a tight bun greeted them with a practiced yet cold smile. Her name tag read Rachel, and her eyes briefly skimmed over the Jackson family, lingering just a moment too long before she spoke. "Do you have a reservation?" she asked, her tone polite but distant, as if the question itself carried an unspoken judgment. "Yes, under Jackson," Andrew replied, maintaining his composure, though he could feel the subtle shift in her demeanor. He had seen it before: quick glance, a barely perceptible pause. It was the kind of thing most people wouldn't notice, but after a lifetime of being on the receiving end of it, Andrew had learned to read these moments all too well. Rachel scanned the reservation book, her fingers moving more slowly than necessary as she searched for their name. After what felt like an unnecessary pause, she looked up with that same tight-lipped smile. "Right this way," she said, gesturing for them to follow. The Jacksons walked through the restaurant, passing tables filled with well-dressed patrons. Some of the diners glanced up as they passed, their eyes following the family with a quiet curiosity that bordered on discomfort. Others barely acknowledged them, absorbed in their own conversations. But the stares were there, subtle but present, like an undercurrent that couldn't be ignored. Rachel led them to a table near the back of the restaurant, far from the large windows that overlooked the bustling streets, and even farther from the more crowded sections of the dining room. It was a table tucked away in a corner, isolated from the other guests. Andrew exchanged a glance with Carla as they sat down. He didn't need to say anything. Carla already knew what he was thinking. This wasn't the first time they had been seated in a less-than-ideal spot at a restaurant, and it wouldn't be the last. It was a small slight, one that most people might brush off, but for Andrew and Carla, it was part of a pattern they had seen time and time again. "Here are your menus," Rachel said, placing the leather-bound books in front of them. "Your server will be with you shortly." With that, she walked away, leaving the Jacksons alone at their table. Tiffany was the first to speak, her voice tinged with confusion. "Why are we sitting all the way back here? We had a reservation, didn't we?" Andrew nodded, his eyes scanning the room. "We did, sweetheart. Sometimes people make assumptions, but it's fine. We're here to celebrate." Jordan, who had been quiet up until now, looked down at the menu, his fingers tracing the embossed letters on the front. "Do you think they're treating us differently because we're black?" he asked quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. Carla reached over and gently touched his arm. "Baby, sometimes people do things that aren't fair. But we don't let it ruin our night, okay? This is about celebrating your dad." Jordan nodded, though his expression remained thoughtful, as if he was trying to make sense of something much larger than just a table in a restaurant. The menus were filled with elaborate dishes, each one more extravagant than the last. From the roasted duck with fig glaze to the truffle-infused risotto, it was clear that the Magnolia Grill prided itself on its gourmet offerings. But as the Jackson family perused the options, the excitement that had filled the car ride over seemed to dim. Their waiter, a young man named Kyle, approached the table with the same air of indifference that Rachel had shown. His eyes briefly flickered over the family, but he avoided making direct eye contact as he handed out the menus. "Good evening," Kyle said, his tone rushed and formal. "I'll be your server tonight. Can I start you off with something to drink?" Andrew glanced at his family before responding. "Well, have water to start. I think we need a minute to look over the menu." Kyle nodded quickly, scribbling something down on his notepad without so much as a glance in Andrew's direction. "I'll be back in a few minutes." As Kyle walked away, the family exchanged a quiet glance. There was something about the way he had approached them, the way he hadn't really engaged with them, that left a bad taste in their mouths. Carla sighed softly, her fingers tapping the edge of the table. "It's always the same, isn't it?" she said, her voice low so only Andrew could hear. Andrew nodded, leaning back in his chair. "It is, but let's try not to let it get to us. We've got bigger things to celebrate." But as the minutes passed and their waiter didn't return, it became harder and harder to ignore the growing discomfort. The other tables around them were buzzing with energy patrons, chatting and laughing as their food was served promptly. But for the Jacksons, the minutes stretched on, and the feeling of being overlooked became more apparent. Tiffany, ever the outspoken one, finally broke the silence. "They're ignoring us, aren't they?" she asked, her tone sharp with frustration. Andrew sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Maybe they're just busy," he offered, though even he didn't fully believe it. Jordan shifted uncomfortably in his seat, his eyes flicking around the room. "But we got here before some of those other people," he said quietly, nodding toward a table that had just been seated. "Why aren't they serving us?" Before Andrew could respond, Kyle reappeared at the table, his expression neutral as he set down their waters with a dull thud. He didn't offer any apologies for the delay, nor did he make any effort to engage with the family beyond the bare minimum. "Have you decided what you'd like to order?" he asked, his tone clipped and impatient. Andrew forced a polite smile, handing the menus to Kyle. "Yes, I think we're ready. I'll have the steak, medium rare." Carla followed suit, ordering the salmon, while Tiffany and Jordan placed their orders as well. The entire interaction felt rushed, as though Kyle couldn't wait to be done with their table. As Kyle scribbled down their orders, his impatience was palpable. "All right, I'll get that in for you," he muttered, before walking away, disappearing into the kitchen without so much as a glance back. The silence that followed was thick, the weight of the unspoken tension settling over the table like a heavy blanket. Andrew clenched his jaw, his fingers drumming against the table as he tried to maintain his composure. He didn't want to let the night be ruined, but the slights, the dismissive looks, the slow service, the feeling of being out of place were becoming harder to ignore. Tiffany glanced around the room, her frustration bubbling to the surface. "This isn't right, Dad," she said quietly. "Why are they treating us like this? We didn't do anything wrong." Andrew sighed, rubbing his temples. "No, sweetheart, we didn't. But sometimes it doesn't matter. People treat you a certain way because of what they think, not because of who you are." Carla reached across the table, taking Andrew's hand in hers. "We're not going to let them ruin our night," she said softly, her voice filled with quiet determination. "This is about celebrating you. Remember, you've worked too hard to let this ruin it." Andrew smiled at her, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "You're right," he said, though the frustration lingered just beneath the surface. "Let's try to make the best of it." As the minutes ticked by, the family tried to focus on enjoying the evening, but the growing discomfort was hard to ignore. The Jacksons watched as other tables, many of which had been seated after them, were served their meals. Plates of steaming food were delivered with smiles and warmth, while their own table remained empty and unnoticed. Jordan fidgeted in his seat, glancing around nervously. Tiffany, never one to hold back, leaned over to her father. "Dad, they're ignoring us on purpose," she whispered. "Look at everyone else. They're all getting their food." Andrew's jaw tightened, but before he could respond, a tall figure appeared at their table. It was Mr. Wacth, the owner of the Magnolia Grill, a man known for his imposing presence and no-nonsense attitude. His expression was hard, his lips pressed into a thin line as he approached them. "Is there a problem?" Andrew asked, his voice polite but wary. Mr. Wacth didn't bother with pleasantries. "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to leave," he said, his tone as cold as the air-conditioned restaurant. Carla blinked in disbelief. "What, we haven't even eaten yet?" "You're violating the dress code, Mr. Wacth said, his eyes scanning the family's attire with disdain. Andrew looked down at his neatly pressed suit and tie, then at Carla's elegant dress and the kids' well-put-together outfits. "We're dressed appropriately," he said, keeping his voice steady despite the anger bubbling beneath the surface. "What dress code are we violating?" Mr. Wacth's sneer deepened. "This is a fine dining establishment, not some fast food joint. I'm asking you to leave now, or I'll be forced to call the police." The weight of the moment hit the family like a ton of bricks. Tiffany's eyes widened in shock, and Jordan looked like he was on the verge of tears. Carla's face flushed with a mix of anger and humiliation, her hands trembling slightly as she reached for her purse. "Sir," Andrew began, his voice tight with barely restrained anger, "we've done nothing wrong. We're paying customers, just like everyone else here." Mr. Wacth's gaze didn't waver. "I don't care. You're not welcome here." The murmurs in the restaurant grew louder, whispers cutting through the air like knives. Some patrons glanced at the Jacksons with a mix of curiosity and amusement, while others avoided eye contact altogether. But no one spoke up. No one intervened. Carla stood up, her posture stiff with anger. "Well, go," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "We don't need to stay where we're not wanted." Andrew hesitated for a moment, his fists clenched at his sides, but he knew there was no point in fighting. He nodded, rising from his chair as he helped Tiffany and Jordan to their feet. Together, the family walked toward the door, the eyes of the entire restaurant following them as they went. Just as they reached the door, it swung open, and in walked a man who commanded the room without saying a word. He was tall, with broad shoulders and a sharply tailored suit, his skin dark and his presence undeniable. There was something about him, an air of quiet confidence and authority, that immediately drew everyone's attention. Andrew didn't recognize him, but there was something about the way the man carried himself that suggested he was someone important. As the Jackson family passed him, the man nodded politely, offering them a brief but meaningful look before turning his attention to the restaurant. Curiosity got the better of them, and the Jacksons stopped just a few feet from the door, watching as the man approached Mr. Wacth, who was still standing near the table they had just vacated. "What's happening?" Tiffany whispered, her eyes wide. "I don't know," Andrew muttered, watching closely. "But I think we're about to find out." The Jackson family stood outside the Magnolia Grill, the night air cooler now, heavy with their unspoken emotions. Andrew felt a fire burning inside him, an anger he had carefully kept in check all his life. He had been trained, through experience, to pick his battles, but tonight, after everything, it felt like a line had been crossed. Carla stood beside him, her hands shaking as she held her purse, her face a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. Tiffany and Jordan were silent, their faces filled with confusion and hurt. Tiffany, always quick to speak her mind, broke the silence first. "Dad, why did they do that? Why didn't we fight back?" Andrew sighed deeply, his hands clenched into fists, then relaxed. "It's not always worth it, sweetheart. Sometimes you have to walk away. It's not fair, but that's how it is." "But it's not right," Tiffany shot back, her eyes blazing with anger. "We didn't do anything wrong. And that man, he treated us like we didn't belong." Andrew didn't answer immediately. He knew she was right. It wasn't right, and it wasn't fair. But this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. Andrew had learned long ago to choose when to push back and when to let it go. But he wasn't sure if he could let this go. Not tonight. "I know it's not right," Andrew finally said, his voice low, "but we're not going to let them take away what we came here to celebrate. We still have tonight." Jordan, who had been quiet this whole time, finally spoke, his voice small. "It felt like they didn't want us there at all." Carla knelt down in front of him, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Baby, some people don't understand that everyone deserves to be treated with respect. But we hold our heads high, okay? We don't let people like that make us feel less than we are." Jordan nodded, but the hurt in his eyes remained. Carla straightened, her gaze drifting toward the restaurant door. "Maybe we should just go home." Andrew opened his mouth to respond, but before he could say anything, the doors to the restaurant swung open again. The man they had passed on the way out, the tall, imposing figure in the tailored suit, was stepping out now, walking toward them with a sense of purpose. Andrew tensed instinctively, unsure of what to expect. The man stopped in front of them, his expression calm but serious. He offered a nod, his voice deep but measured. "Good evening. My name is Marcus Hall. I'm the new owner of this restaurant chain." Andrew blinked, caught off guard. "You're the owner?" Marcus nodded, his gaze steady. "Yes, I purchased the Magnolia grill chain about a month ago. I was in town tonight to see how things were running." He paused, his eyes narrowing slightly. "I'm sorry for what happened to your family inside." "I saw everything." Carla glanced at Andrew, then back at Marcus. "You saw?" Marcus nodded, his expression hardening. "Yes, and what I saw was completely unacceptable. That's not the kind of business I want to run." There was a brief moment of silence as the Jacksons took in his words. Tiffany, still brimming with anger, crossed her arms over her chest. "So, what are you going to do about it?" Marcus' gaze shifted to her, and for the first time, his stern expression softened just a little. "I'm going to make sure it never happens again. To anyone." Before Andrew could respond, Marcus turned and walked back toward the restaurant. The Jacksons exchanged uncertain glances, unsure of what to do. Curiosity, frustration, and hope battled inside them as they hesitated near the entrance. Inside, Marcus approached the hostess stand where Rachel, the blonde hostess, stood frozen, her eyes wide with confusion. He leaned in toward her, speaking in a voice too low for the Jacksons to hear. Rachel's face paled as he spoke, and her hands trembled as she glanced toward the door, clearly understanding that something serious was happening. Moments later, Marcus strode deeper into the restaurant, his eyes scanning the room until they landed on Mr. West, the owner who had just ejected the Jacksons. West, unaware of what was coming, was speaking with a table of regular patrons, his back to Marcus. "West," Marcus called out, his voice commanding. "Mr. West turned, his smile fading the moment he saw Marcus walking toward him. His posture stiffened as Marcus approached, a sense of dread beginning to settle in his gut. "Mr. Hall," West greeted him, his voice laced with nervous energy. "I didn't expect to see you here tonight. If I'd known—" "Stop!" Marcus' voice was cold, cutting him off mid-sentence. "I saw what you did to that family." West's eyes widened, a bead of sweat forming on his forehead. "Look, it's not what you think." "It's exactly what I think," Marcus snapped, his voice low but deadly serious. The entire restaurant had gone silent, the patrons turning to watch the scene unfold. "You humiliated a family for no reason other than the color of their skin. You threatened to call the police on them because they had the nerve to want a nice meal at your restaurant." "My restaurant?" West's face went pale, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. I didn't—" "You did," Marcus said, his tone final. "And I won't tolerate that kind of behavior in any of my businesses." The silence in the restaurant was suffocating now. Every eye was on Marcus and West, the air thick with anticipation. No one dared to move or speak. "I'm sorry," West stammered, his voice weak. "I didn't know they were—" "You didn't know they were what customers human beings." Marcus shook his head, disgusted. "I don't care what excuses you have, West. You're fired." West's face contorted with shock, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to back him up. But the patrons who had been so comfortable in their silence moments before were now pretending not to watch. No one would come to his defense. "Wait, please," West begged, his voice cracking. "I've been here for years." "I didn't mean to." Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. "You've been here for years and still thought it was okay to treat people like this. No. You're done." He gestured to the security guard near the entrance, and within seconds, West was being escorted out of the restaurant, his face red with humiliation. The tension in the room was unbearable as he was led past the Jacksons, his head hung low. The silence stretched on until the door finally closed behind him. As the door closed behind Mr. West, the Jacksons stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. Marcus turned back to them, his expression now softer, more apologetic. "Mr. Jackson," he called out, his voice loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear. "Would you and your family come back inside, please?" Andrew hesitated. His fists, which had been clenched so tightly moments before, slowly began to relax. He glanced at Carla, whose expression mirrored his uncertainty. She raised an eyebrow, silently asking what they should do. Andrew exhaled deeply, then nodded. The family slowly walked back toward the entrance, their hearts heavy with a mix of emotions. As they re-entered the restaurant, the eyes of the patrons followed them, but this time the looks were different. There was no longer judgment or disdain. Instead, the patrons seemed subdued, embarrassed even. Shame lingered in the air, and not just for the way the Jacksons had been treated, but for the fact that no one had stood up for them when it mattered. Marcus gestured toward one of the best tables in the house, near the grand piano where soft jazz music played in the background. It was a beautiful spot, with a view of the entire restaurant as well as the street outside. "Please," Marcus said, his voice filled with sincerity. "Have a seat. Tonight, your meal is on me." Carla hesitated, still wary. "We don't want any trouble." "There won't be any trouble," Marcus assured her, his tone firm but kind. "Not anymore." Slowly, the Jacksons sat down, their nerves still on edge but beginning to settle. Tiffany glanced around the room, her anger now replaced with curiosity. Jordan was quiet, his eyes wide, still processing everything that had happened. Marcus remained standing by their table for a moment longer, his voice lowering so that only they could hear. "I'm truly sorry for what you experienced tonight. I want you to know that this is not how we do business." "It's not how I do business." Andrew looked up at him, his expression softening. "Thank you. You didn't have to do what you did, but we appreciate it." Marcus shook his head. "I did have to. It's my responsibility to make sure that no one is ever treated the way you were tonight. And it's not just about you. It's about making sure this town becomes the kind of place where everyone is welcome, regardless of the color of their skin." There was a brief moment of silence as Andrew processed Marcus' words. He could feel the sincerity in the man's voice, the weight of responsibility he carried. Slowly, Andrew extended his hand. "Thank you." Marcus shook his hand firmly, a small smile playing at the corner of his lips. "Enjoy your meal," he said before turning to leave. The Jacksons sat in silence for a moment, letting the events of the evening sink in. The restaurant had returned to its quiet buzz, the soft clinking of silverware and muted conversations filling the air once again. But the energy in the room was different now. There was a newfound respect, a sense that something important had just shifted. As their food arrived, prepared with extra care by the kitchen staff who had witnessed the entire scene, Jacksons began to relax. The tension that had gripped them since they walked through the doors earlier in the evening slowly began to melt away. For the first time that night, they could actually enjoy their meal. Tiffany, ever the curious one, leaned in toward her father. "Dad, do you think that man Marcus is going to change things? Like, really change them?" Andrew thought for a moment, taking a bite of his steak before responding. I think he already has, he said, his voice thoughtful. It's not easy to stand up to people like West. But he did. And now, everyone here knows that the rules are changing. Jordan, who had been quietly picking at his food, finally spoke up. But why did it have to happen in the first place? Why do people still treat us like that? Carla reached across the table, gently touching her son's hand. Baby, I wish I had a good answer for you. But what I do know is that we can't let people like that make us feel small. We keep pushing forward. And tonight we won. Jordan nodded slowly, but there was still a sadness in his eyes. Tiffany leaned over and nudged him gently. Hey, we got the best table in the house now, right? She said, her tone light. Jordan managed a small smile. Yeah, I guess we did. The rest of the meal passed with quiet conversation and moments of reflection. The Jacksons were finally able to enjoy the evening they had hoped for, even if it hadn't turned out exactly as they had imagined. There was still a sense of victory in the air, a victory not just for them, but for everyone who had ever felt like they didn't belong. By the time they finished their meal, the mood at the table had shifted entirely. The laughter and lightheartedness that had been missing earlier in the evening had returned, and for the first time that night, the Jacksons could truly celebrate. As they stood to leave, Marcus reappeared, walking them to the door with a warm smile. Thank you for staying, he said. I hope tonight wasn't just the end of something, but the beginning of something better. Andrew nodded. It feels like it could be. Thank you again. The Jacksons stepped outside, the cool night air greeting them as they left the restaurant behind. But the events of the evening were far from over. As they walked to their car, they noticed that several other patrons from the restaurant were still standing nearby, quietly watching. Some offered hesitant nods of acknowledgement. Others looked away, clearly grappling with the weight of what they had witnessed. The family drove home in relative silence, each lost in their own thoughts. But the air between them felt lighter now, the weight of the evening lifting as they realized that something had changed, not just for them, but for the entire town of Stone Creek. The incident at the Magnolia Grill had sparked something, and they knew that this was only the beginning. The next morning, the Jackson family awoke to a different reality in Stone Creek. What had started as a quiet family celebration at the Magnolia Grill had exploded into the town's latest controversy. Word spread quickly, faster than Andrew expected, about what had happened at the restaurant the previous night. By the time Andrew sat down with his coffee, his phone was buzzing with messages. Carla was already at the kitchen table, reading a local blog post on her tablet. They're calling it the Magnolia incident, she said, glancing up at him with raised eyebrows. Andrew frowned as he sat down next to her. That didn't take long. How bad is it? Carla scrolled through the post, reading aloud, local businessman Marcus Hall takes a stand against discrimination at the Magnolia Grill, firing the longtime restaurant manager after he was witnessed treating a black family unfairly. Tiffany, who had just wandered into the kitchen, heard her mother reading and rolled her eyes. They're making it sound like some kind of heroic standoff. Andrew sighed, rubbing his forehead. In a way it was, Tiff. But they're turning this into a spectacle. I just wanted us to have a nice evening, not to be the center of town gossip. Well, you're going to be the talk of the town for a while, Carla said, putting down the tablet. People are talking, and not just about what happened. They're talking about us, about Marcus Hall, about what it means for this town. Andrew's stomach tightened. He hadn't asked for any of this. Yes, Marcus had done the right thing, and it had felt good, vindicating even. But now the town was buzzing with questions. Had the Jacksons overreacted? Was Marcus Hall too harsh? Was there really an issue with racism in Stone Creek? Tiffany crossed her arms, leaning against the counter. Well, good. Maybe it's time people started talking about this stuff. Jordan, who had been quietly eating his cereal, looked up. I don't get why people are so upset. It was wrong what they did. Everyone should see that, right? Carla sighed softly, exchanging a glance with Andrew. People don't like change, baby, she said gently. Sometimes it's easier for them to pretend things aren't as bad as they are, even when the truth is right in front of them. Andrew nodded. But you're right, Jordan. It was wrong, and what Marcus did it was brave. And important. But it's going to make a lot of people uncomfortable. Jordan furrowed his brow. Why Why would anyone be mad about something that's right? Because, Andrew said, taking a sip of his coffee, acknowledging the truth means they have to face their own prejudices. And for some people, that's harder than you think. The rest of the day confirmed Andrew's fears. As the story of the Magnolia incident spread, the town of Stone Creek began to reveal its divisions. At the local coffee shop, Andrew overheard snippets of conversations that left him feeling uneasy. "I've never had a problem at the Magnolia Grill," a woman said to her friend at a nearby table. "Maybe they just took it the wrong way. You know how people can be oversensitive these days." Andrew gritted his teeth but kept his head down, trying to ignore the whispers around him. Later that afternoon, Carla ran into an old acquaintance at the grocery store. Mrs. Thompson, a woman she'd known for years, approached her with a polite but guarded smile. "I heard what happened last night, Mrs. Thompson said, her voice tinged with awkwardness. "I'm sorry you had to go through that." Carla smiled, though it felt forced. "Thank you. It was unexpected, but Marcus Hall did the right thing." Mrs. Thompson nodded slowly, her eyes darting around as if to check who might be listening. "It's just, well, I've never seen anything like that happen before. Are you sure it was, racism?" Carla felt her heart skip a beat, a familiar frustration rising within her. "Yes, Mrs. Thompson. I'm sure." The older woman's smile faltered. "Well, I'm glad it all worked out in the end. Take care now." As she walked away, Carla stood there, shaking her head. It wasn't that Mrs. Thompson had been overtly rude, on the contrary. Her words had been polite enough. But the implication behind them, the subtle suggestion that perhaps the Jacksons had misunderstood what had happened, was clear. People didn't want to confront the fact that Stone Creek had a problem. It was easier to brush it off as a misunderstanding. By the time Carla got home, she was exhausted, not just physically, but emotionally. As she unpacked groceries, she recounted her conversation with Andrew. "It's like they don't want to believe it," she said, frustration creeping into her voice. "They don't want to see that racism is right here in front of them." Andrew nodded, his expression darkening. "I heard the same thing in town today. People making excuses, saying maybe it wasn't what we thought it was." "Well, they can't ignore it forever," Tiffany said from the doorway, arms crossed. "Marcus Hall isn't going to let them." Marcus Hall, it seemed, had no intention of staying quiet. Over the next few days, he became a prominent figure in Stone Creek, speaking openly about what had happened at the Magnolia Grill and what it meant for the town. He attended a town hall meeting, standing in front of the gathered residents with calm authority. Andrew and Carla were there, sitting quietly in the back, watching as Marcus took the floor. "Let's be clear," Marcus began, his deep voice echoing through the room. "What happened the other night was not an isolated incident. It's part of a larger problem, a problem that's been ignored in this town for too long." There were murmurs in the crowd, some in agreement, others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," Marcus continued, his tone even but firm. "I came here to run a business and to be part of this community. But I won't stand by and let my businesses be places where people are made to feel less than, where they're treated differently because of the color of their skin." The room was quiet now, the weight of Marcus' words settling over the crowd. "I know some of you think this was blown out of proportion," Marcus said, his gaze sweeping the room. "But ask yourselves, if it had been you and your family, how would you have felt? How would you have reacted? And more importantly, what are you going to do to make sure it doesn't happen again?" A ripple of discomfort passed through the audience. People exchanged glances, some nodding in agreement, others looking away. But the message was clear. Marcus wasn't just talking about the Magnolia Grill. He was talking about Stone Creek as a whole. After the meeting, Andrew and Carla approached Marcus, thanking him for speaking up. "You're doing more than just standing up for us," Andrew said, shaking Marcus' hand. "You're standing up for the whole town." Marcus smiled, though there was a seriousness in his eyes. "I'm doing what needs to be done, and I'm not finished yet." While Marcus Hall continued to push for change in the business community, Tiffany found herself stepping up at her high school. The incident at the Magnolia Grill had ignited something in Hera, fierce determination to confront the issues of race and prejudice head-on, especially among her peers. At school, she heard the whispers. Some of her classmates had heard about what had happened to her family. Some were supportive, others curious, and a few were dismissive. "What's the big deal?" one student had said to her in passing. "It's just a restaurant. Why make such a fuss?" Tiffany's jaw had tightened, but she hadn't responded in the moment. She knew she had to be smarter about how she approached these conversations. So, with the help of a few friends and a sympathetic teacher, she organized a discussion group at school. They called it Talk About ETA Space, for students to talk about issues of race, discrimination, and inclusivity. At the first meeting, the turnout surprised her. More than 20 students showed up, and while some were there out of curiosity, others were there to genuinely engage. Tiffany stood at the front of the room, nervous but determined. "I know some of you have heard about what happened to my family," she began. "But this isn't just about us. It's about how we treat each other every day, in school, in town, and how we let things slide because we think it's not a big deal. But it is a big deal." As the weeks went on, the group grew. Students began to open up, sharing their own experiences of feeling different, of being treated unfairly. Some of Tiffany's classmates who had never thought much about race began to understand the subtle ways prejudice could affect their peers. It wasn't always about overt acts of racism. It was about the small, everyday things that built up over time. While Tiffany was busy leading discussions at school, Jordan found his own way to process the events at the Magnolia Grill. He had always been quieter than his sister, more introspective, and his response to the world around him had often been through art. But since that night, he had struggled to express his feelings. One afternoon, a week after the town hall meeting, Jordan sat at his desk in his bedroom, staring at a blank piece of paper. His colored pencils were scattered across the desk, but his hands were still. He wasn't sure where to begin. The images from that night were still fresh in his mind, the way Mr. West had looked at them, the tension in the room, the way his dad's voice had trembled just a little when he stood up to leave. Jordan didn't know how to make sense of it all. Finally, he picked up a pencil and began to draw. At first the lines were hesitant, unsure. But as he continued, the image took shape: a family sitting at a table, their heads held high, even as the shadows around them grew darker. It was a scene from that night, but it was more than that. It was how he had felt, how he had seen his family strong, even in the face of something ugly. As Jordan worked, he felt the tension inside him begin to ease. Art had always been his way of processing emotions, but this time it felt different. This time, it felt like he was speaking out in a way he hadn't before. By the time he finished, the paper in front of him was filled with coloric, deep shades of red, blue, and black, the scene almost glowing with intensity. It wasn't just a drawing, it was a message. The next day, Jordan showed the drawing to his art teacher, Ms. Saunders, who was visibly moved by the piece. She encouraged him to submit it to the local art gallery's upcoming exhibition, which was focused on the theme of identity and belonging. Jordan hesitated at first. He wasn't sure if he was ready to share something so personal with the world. But after some thought, he agreed, and soon his work was on display alongside other pieces from local artists. At the opening night of the exhibition, Jordan stood quietly by his artwork, watching as people stopped to admire it. Some whispered to each other, pointing at the drawing with wide eyes. Others simply stood in silence, taking in the emotion captured in the scene. One visitor, an older man, approached Jordan and smiled. "That's a powerful piece," he said, his voice kind. "You've got a real gift, kid. Don't stop using it." Jordan smiled shyly, but inside he felt a swell of pride. For the first time, he realized that his voice mattered, that he could express things through his art that words couldn't quite capture. Months passed, and the town of Stone Creek began to change slowly, but surely. The conversations that had started in the wake of the Magnolia incident didn't die down. Instead, they grew, spreading to every corner of the community. Businesses, inspired by Marcus Hall's actions, began to adopt anti-discrimination policies, ensuring that everyone, regardless of race, would be treated with dignity and respect. Schools introduced new programs focused on inclusivity, and the youth of Stone Creek, by students like Tiffany, became vocal advocates for change. At home, the Jackson family settled into a new normal. The pain and frustration from that night at the Magnolia Grill hadn't disappeared, but they had learned to channel it into something productive. Andrew and Carla became more active in town discussions, while Tiffany continued her work at school and Jordan found his voice through his art. One evening, several months after the incident, the Jacksons hosted a small gathering at their home. Friends and neighbors filled the backyard, laughing and talking as the sun set over Stone Creek. It was a peaceful night, the kind of night that felt like a fresh start. Andrew stood at the grill, flipping burgers, while Carla chatted with some neighbors nearby. Tiffany was surrounded by a group of her friends, and Jordan was showing off his latest sketchbook to a few guests who had admired his work at the art gallery. As Andrew looked around at the gathering, he felt a deep sense of peace. Things weren't perfect. There was still work to be done, and the fight for equality wasn't over, but for the first time in a long time, it felt like the town was moving in the right direction. Carla came over to him, slipping her arm around his waist as they watched their children. "We've come a long way, haven't we?" she said softly. Andrew nodded, smiling down at her. "We have, and we're not done yet." Carla smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. "No, but it feels good, doesn't it, to know we're making a difference?" Andrew kissed the top of her head. "Yeah, it does." As the evening wore on and the stars began to twinkle overhead, the Jackson family stood together, strong, united, and ready for whatever the future held. The night at the Magnolia Grill had been a turning point, not just for them, but for the entire town. And as they looked out over their friends and neighbors, they knew that they had played a part in something bigger than themselves, a movement toward a better, more inclusive world. The changes in Stone Creek didn't happen overnight, but they were real. The events at the Magnolia Grill had sparked a larger conversation that rippled through the entire town. People who had once stayed silent began to speak out. Others, who had never truly considered the impact of their words or actions, started to rethink their behavior. The town wasn't perfect, far from it, but something had undeniably shifted. People were listening in ways they hadn't before. At the Stone Creek Town Hall, a meeting had been called to discuss the racial climate of the community. Marcus Hall had become a vocal figure in these town-wide discussions, and he wasn't alone. Other black families, previously hesitant to speak up, were now sharing their own stories of subtle and overt discrimination at restaurants, shops, and even at school events. The Jackson family sat in the back of the meeting, listening quietly as one after another, residents shared their thoughts. Some were supportive of the changes happening in the town, while others pushed back, insisting that Stone Creek didn't really have a race problem. One older man, Mr. Beckett, stood up and addressed the room. "I've lived in this town for 60 years, he said, his voice gruff, "and I've never had a problem with anyone because of their skin color. I don't see why we need to make this into such a big deal." Andrew felt the frustration rising in his chest as he listened, but he kept quiet, knowing that these types of conversations were part of the process. Carla reached over, giving his hand a reassuring squeeze, reminding him that this was just the beginning of a long road. Marcus Hall stood up, his calm demeanor contrasting with the tension in the room. "Mr. Beckett," Marcus began, his voice steady, "it's great that you've never had an issue with race, but that doesn't mean the people around you haven't. We're not here to make anyone feel guilty. We're here to make sure that moving forward, every person in this town is treated with respect and dignity." The room grew quiet as Marcus' words settled over the crowd. "This isn't about blame," Marcus continued. "It's about recognizing that there are real issues here. Ignoring them won't make them go away." After a long silence, a woman in the front row raised her hand. Mrs. Hartman, the local school principal, stood up. "I think we've all seen what's been happening, even if we didn't want to admit it before. It's time we start addressing these things head-on, especially in our schools. We need to make sure that our students know this kind of behavior won't be tolerated." Her statement was met with a wave of murmurs. Some nodded in agreement, while others crossed their arms defensively. But the conversation was happening, and that was what mattered. The town hall meeting continued for hours, with people from all walks of life sharing their thoughts and experiences. By the end of the night, There was a sense that something had shifted, a small victory in a larger battle for justice and equality. Back at the Jackson household, things had been quieter since the incident, but the family remained focused on what came next. Andrew had been invited to speak at a community event, one aimed at fostering unity and understanding in the town. It wasn't the kind of thing he usually did. Public speaking wasn't his strong suit. But after everything that had happened, he felt a responsibility to share his family's story. The night of the event arrived, and as Andrew stood backstage, he felt the familiar weight of nervousness settle over him. He could hear the quiet chatter of the crowd outside, and part of him wanted to run. But then he thought of his family, Carla, Tiffany, and Jordan, and he remembered why he was there. He had to do this, not just for them, but for every person in Stone Creek who had ever felt like they didn't belong. As his name was announced, Andrew stepped onto the stage, his heart pounding in his chest. The bright lights blinded him momentarily, but as his eyes adjusted, he saw the faces of his friends, neighbors, and even strangers, all looking at him, waiting for him to speak. He took a deep breath and began. "My family and I moved to Stone Creek because we believed in this community," Andrew said, his voice steady despite the nerves. "We believed in the values of hard work, fairness, and respect. But what happened to us at the Magnolia Grill made me realize that we're not as far along as we'd like to think." He paused, scanning the room. "But that doesn't mean we can't get there." Andrew went on to share the details of that night, not to place blame, but to help people understand the reality of what they had faced. He spoke about the feeling of being treated like an outsider, of the weight that discrimination carried even when it wasn't overt. And he spoke about the importance of real change, not just in words, but in actions. "There's been a lot of talk about whether what happened was an isolated incident," Andrew said, his gaze sweeping the crowd. "But I'm here to tell you it wasn't. It's part of a larger problem, one that exists not just in Stone Creek, but everywhere. And the only way we can fix it is by acknowledging it and working together to change it." The room was silent, the weight of Andrew's words hanging in the air. After a moment, a ripple of applause began, slowly growing until the entire room was clapping. Andrew stepped back from the microphone, his heart racing but feeling lighter than it had in months. As he left the stage, Carla was waiting for him, her eyes shining with pride. "You were amazing," she whispered, wrapping her arms around him. Andrew smiled, the tension in his shoulders finally releasing. "Thanks. I just hope people were listening." "They were," Carla said, her voice full of conviction. "They were." Back at Stone Creek High School, Tiffany's Talk About It group had grown beyond her wildest expectations. What had started as a small circle of students meeting once a week had blossomed into a school-wide initiative. Teachers were getting involved, helping to guide discussions, and students who had once been silent were now finding their voices. One day, after the group's weekly meeting, Tiffany was approached by Amelia, a classmate she had never spoken to before. Amelia had always been quiet, blending into the background of the classroom, but today she seemed different. "Tiffany," Amelia said hesitantly, "I just wanted to say thank you. For starting this group, I mean. I never really thought about race and discrimination until now, but it's opened my eyes. And I'm sorry for not speaking up sooner." Tiffany smiled, touched by the sincerity in Amelia's words. "It's okay. We're all learning." "That's the whole point, right?" Amelia nodded. "Right. And I'm with you. I want to help make sure this school is a place where everyone feels safe and respected." From that day on, Tiffany and Amelia worked together to expand the group's reach, organizing school-wide assemblies and bringing in guest speakers to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They worked with the administration to revise school policies, ensuring that acts of discrimination, no matter how small, would be addressed immediately. For the first time, Tiffany felt like her voice was making a difference, not just for her, but for everyone at Stone Creek High. While Tiffany was making waves at school, Jordan was quietly becoming a recognized name in the town's art scene. His artwork, which had started as a personal outlet for processing his emotions, had caught the attention of several local art galleries. After his piece from the Identity and Belonging exhibition gained attention, Jordan received an invitation to showcase more of his work at the Stone Creek Arts Festival. At first, he was hesitant. He wasn't used to the spotlight, and the idea of having his personal thoughts and emotions displayed for the entire town to see made him nervous. But with encouragement from his parents and Ms. Saunders, he agreed. On the day of the festival, Jordan stood beside his collection of drawings and paintings, watching as people stopped to admire his work. His pieces told a story, his story, and the story of so many others who had felt out of place or overlooked. He had captured the feeling of isolation, but also the strength that came from standing up for what was right. As the day wore on, Jordan noticed a familiar face approaching his booth. It was Mr. Nichols, his school's art teacher from years ago. Mr. Nichols had always encouraged Jordan's talent, but he had never imagined that Jordan would go on to make such an impact. "Jordan, Mr. Nichols said, his voice filled with admiration. "This work is incredible. You've grown so much as an artist." Jordan smiled shyly. "Thanks, Mr. Nichols. I wanted to say something with my art." "And you have, Mr. Nichols said, nodding. "You've said something important. Don't stop. Keep creating. Keep telling your story." Jordan nodded, his confidence growing with each passing conversation. For the first time, he realized that his art could be more than just a hobby. It could be a way to inspire others, to bring about change. Meanwhile, Marcus Hall continued to build on the momentum of what had started at the Magnolia Grill. He wasn't content with just firing one restaurant manager. He wanted to ensure that no business in his chain or in the town of Stone Creek would ever treat anyone the way the Jackson family had been treated. He started hosting workshops for local business owners, offering training on diversity and inclusivity. He partnered with community leaders to create programs that would promote equal opportunities for all residents of Stone Creek. His efforts didn't go unnoticed. People began to see him as a true leader, someone who wasn't afraid to challenge the status quo. One afternoon, Marcus invited Andrew to lunch at the Magnolia Grill. It had been months since that fateful night, and now the restaurant was under completely new management. As they sat down at a table near the front of the restaurant, Marcus smiled. "This place has changed a lot since the last time you were here." Andrew looked around, noticing the difference in the atmosphere. There was no tension, no uncomfortable stares, just the hum of quiet conversation and the scent of freshly prepared food. "It has," Andrew agreed, nodding. "And so has the town." Marcus leaned back in his chair, smiling. "It's not perfect, but we're getting there." Andrew chuckled. "I never thought one night at a restaurant could change so much." "It wasn't just one night," Marcus said thoughtfully. "It was everything that led up to that moment. And everything that's happened since. You and your family, you sparked something in this town. Something good." Andrew smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "I guess we did." Months later, the Jackson family found themselves preparing for a new chapter in their lives. The tension and frustration from the night at the Magnolia Grill had faded, replaced by a renewed sense of purpose. The town of Stone Creek wasn't perfect, but it was growing, evolving, and they were proud to be part of that change. One warm afternoon, as the family gathered for a barbecue in their backyard, they reflected on how far they had come. Friends and neighbors filled the yard, laughter echoing through the air. Tiffany and Jordan played with their friends, while Carla chatted with some of the neighbors. Andrew stood by the grill, flipping burgers, when Marcus Hall arrived with his wife and daughter. They exchanged smiles and hugs, the friendship between their families growing stronger with each passing day. "Who would have thought?" Andrew said, laughing as he handed Marcus a drink. "A year ago, we were just trying to have a quiet dinner, and now look at us." Marcus smiled, nodding. "Funny how life works, isn't it? Sometimes the hardest moments lead to the greatest changes." As the sun began to set, casting a warm, golden light over the backyard, Andrew looked around at the faces of the people who had come together that evening. Friends, neighbors, and even strangers, people from all walks of life, had come to support one another, to celebrate community, and to look forward to a brighter future. For the first time in a long time, Andrew felt at peace. The journey hadn't been easy, but they had come through it stronger. And as he looked at his family, he knew that they were ready for whatever the future held. As the stars began to twinkle in the sky, the Jackson family stood together, united and hopeful. Stone Creek was changing, and so were they. And in the midst of all the challenges, they had found something worth holding on to: each other, their community, and the belief that they could help build a better, more inclusive world. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more content like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Don't forget to turn on notifications by clicking the bell icon so you'll never miss an update. We share powerful stories of resilience, community, and real change. Let's continue the conversation, and together we can inspire more positive transformations. Thanks for watching, and see you next time. Like you did, Ethan took the flyer, reading it over. The program had expanded far beyond what he had imagined, teaching students how to manage money, build a business plan, and pitch their ideas. It was exactly what he had needed when he was younger. "You're already on the right path," Ethan said, handing her back the flyer. "And remember, you don't have to wait until you're older to start. You can begin right now. If you believe in your idea, don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The girl's smile grew wider, her confidence boosted by Ethan's words. He stood up, looking around the school, proud of the legacy he had helped create. This, more than anything else, was what it had all been for: the chance to open doors for the next generation, to give them opportunities he hadn't had. As Skyline Financial continued to grow, Ethan found himself stepping back from the day-to-day operations. His leadership team was strong, and the company was in good hands. He had built something that would outlive him, a legacy that wasn't just about financial success, but about changing lives. But Ethan's work wasn't done. He had plans for the next phase of his life. He wanted to dedicate more of his time to mentorship, working with young entrepreneurs who, like him, had once been told their dreams were too ambitious. He established the Marshall Mentorship Program, offering resources, funding, and guidance to aspiring business owners from underserved backgrounds. Ethan's story had become a beacon for others. Young people from all walks of life looked to him as proof that no matter where you came from or how many times you were told no, success was possible. And that success wasn't just about personal achievement, was about lifting others up along the way. Years later, on a quiet evening, Ethan found himself once again standing on the rooftop of Skyline's headquarters, watching the city lights flicker below. He had done this many times before, but tonight felt different. He was no longer the young man struggling to prove himself. He was no longer the entrepreneur fighting against the odds. He had built something real, something lasting. The city, once a daunting and distant dream, now stretched out before him as a testament to what he had accomplished. But more importantly, it was a reminder of what could be achieved when someone refused to give up, when they refused to let the system define their worth. Ethan had not only changed his own life, he had helped change the world for the better. And as the cool breeze swept across the rooftop, he knew that the best part of his journey wasn't the wealth or the accolades. It was the knowledge that he had made a difference. Ethan took a deep breath, the weight of the years lifting off his shoulders. He had built a future where young people wouldn't have to struggle the way he had. They would have the tools, the support, and the belief in themselves to rise. And that, he realized, was the true measure of success. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a final golden glow over the city, Ethan smiled. The work he had started would continue long after he was gone, carried forward by the people and communities he had helped empower. This was only the beginning of a new era. Thank you for following Ethan Marshall's inspiring journey from rejection to revolution. If this story resonated with you and you'd like to see more uplifting, motivational stories of resilience, innovation, and success, make sure to hit that subscribe button. Don't miss out on our latest content stories that inspire, challenge the status quo, and remind us all of the power of determination. Like, share, and subscribe to stay connected and join the conversation. Your support helps us continue bringing you more amazing content. The battles she had fought and won weren't just for her. They were for every woman, every person of color, every marginalized individual who had ever been made to feel like they didn't belong. And now they were coming together, sharing their stories, and creating a movement. By the end of the evening, Naomi felt energized in a way she hadn't expected. The fight for workplace equality wasn't over, it was just beginning. But now she wasn't fighting alone. As the months passed, Naomi's work continued to grow. She consulted for companies across the country, helping them build more inclusive environments and ensuring that their diversity initiatives were more than just empty promises. She became a mentor to younger women, guiding them as they navigated the complexities of corporate life and encouraging them to stand up for themselves when faced with discrimination. But through it all, Naomi never lost sight of what mattered most: her family. Isaiah was growing fast, his infectious laughter filling their home with joy. And Jason, ever the steady presence in her life, was her constant source of strength and love. One evening, as they sat together in their backyard, watching the sun set over the horizon, Jason turned to Naomi with a smile. "Do you ever stop and think about how far you've come?" he asked, his voice full of pride. Naomi glanced at him, her heart swelling. "I do," she admitted. "Sometimes it feels like a lifetime ago that I was sitting in Ethan's office, wondering how I was going to survive. But now, looking at everything we've built, I'm grateful. I'm grateful for the fight because it brought me here. It gave me a voice, and it gave me the chance to make a real difference." Jason smiled, pulling her close. "You've changed so much, Naomi. And you've changed the world around you, too." Naomi rested her head on his shoulder, the quiet contentment of the moment washing over her. She had fought for her future, for her son's future, and for the future of countless others who deserved better. And though there was still much work to be done, she knew that she had laid the foundation for something lasting, something that would continue to grow long after her battle was over. As Isaiah grew older, Naomi often thought about the kind of world she wanted him to inherit. She had spent years fighting for justice, for equality, for fairness, and now she was determined to pass those values on to her son. One afternoon, as they sat together in the park, Naomi watched Isaiah play in the grass, his laughter ringing out in the afternoon air. She smiled, her heart full of love and hope for the future. Isaiah toddled over to her, holding up a flower he had picked from the ground. "Mama," he called, his voice full of joy. Naomi took the flower from him, brushing a strand of hair away from her face. "Thank you, sweetheart," she said, pulling him into her lap. As she held her son close, Naomi realized that her journey wasn't just about changing the corporate world, it was about creating a better world for him, for all the children who would one day walk in her footsteps. She wanted him to grow up in a world where people were judged by their character, not by the color of their skin or their gender. A world where everyone had an equal chance to succeed. And as she sat there, with Isaiah in her arms and the future stretching out before them, Naomi knew that her fight had been worth it. She had created a legacy built on courage, resilience, and hope. And that legacy would live on, shaping the world for generations to come. Thank you for joining me on Naomi's journey of resilience, courage, and justice. If this story inspired you or made you think about the importance of standing up for what's right, don't forget to hit the subscribe button. Stay connected for more powerful stories that highlight the strength of the human spirit, the fight for equality, and the pursuit of a better future. And remember to click the notification bell so you never miss an update. Your support means the world. Let's continue making a difference together. And now, those students were finding their voices and pushing back against the system. At Brookwood Academy, the changes initiated by Emily Henderson continued to transform the school. With new policies in place, the admissions process became more transparent, and the focus shifted toward building a truly inclusive community. The school's Diversity and Inclusion Office, created in the wake of the lawsuit, became a central hub for student-led initiatives aimed at promoting equity and addressing bias. One of the first major changes was the formation of a student advisory board, which included representatives from different racial, cultural, and socioeconomic backgrounds. Jasmine and Chloe were invited to join the board, and while they were initially hesitant, they saw it as an opportunity to help shape the future of Brookwood. The first meeting of the advisory board was filled with nervous energy, as students from different grades and backgrounds gathered to discuss their visions for the school. Jasmine, who had always been more outspoken, took the lead, while Chloe offered her quiet but insightful input. "We need to make sure that the changes we're making aren't just on paper," Jasmine said during the meeting. "It's not enough to change the admissions process, we need to change the way people think. We need to create a culture where everyone feels like they belong, no matter who they are." The other students nodded in agreement, and soon the conversation flowed freely, with ideas for workshops, cultural events, and mentorship programs aimed at fostering understanding and unity within the student body. Under Emily's leadership, Brookwood also began reaching out to communities that had been historically underrepresented at the school. They partnered with local organizations to recruit students from diverse backgrounds and provided scholarships to ensure that financial barriers wouldn't prevent deserving students from attending. Emily herself worked tirelessly to rebuild trust within the Brookwood community. She held regular town hall meetings with parents and faculty, where she addressed concerns and shared updates on the school's progress. She made it clear that Brookwood was committed to becoming a leader in educational equity. And while some parents remained resistant, the majority embraced the changes. One afternoon, as Jasmine and Chloe were leaving school, they stopped to talk with Emily, who was walking across the campus. "You've both done so much to help make these changes happen," Emily said, her voice warm with admiration. "Brookwood is better because of you." Jasmine smiled, feeling a sense of pride. "It wasn't just us. A lot of people fought to make this happen." "True," Emily replied, "but you were the spark that ignited the change." As Jasmine and Chloe walked away, they reflected on how far they had come. They had once felt like outsiders, unsure of their place at Brookwood, but now they were part of something much bigger, a movement toward a more just and inclusive future. While Brookwood Academy was undergoing a transformation, the Carter family was focused on rebuilding trust, both within their own family and in the community. The emotional toll of the lawsuit and the public scrutiny had been immense, but now that the battle was behind them, they were beginning to heal. Ethan and Vanessa, who had always been a strong team, took time to reconnect with each other and with their daughters. They made a conscious effort to spend more time together as a family, away from the pressures of their respective careers. Weekend trips, family dinners, and quiet evenings at home became a regular part of their routine. For Jasmine and Chloe, the process of rebuilding trust within themselves was more personal. The past year had tested their resilience, but it had also taught them important lessons about their own strength and the power of their voices. Jasmine, who had always felt the need to prove herself academically, began to let go of the idea that her worth was tied to her achievements. She realized that her place at Brookwood wasn't something she had to justify, it was something she had earned. She also started to explore her interests outside of academics, joining the school's debate team and getting involved in student government. Chloe, who had struggled with anxiety and self-doubt, found solace in her art. She began to use her creativity as an outlet for her emotions, expressing through painting and drawing what she couldn't always put into words. Her art teacher noticed her talent and encouraged her to showcase her work in the school's annual art exhibit. "I didn't think anyone would want to see my stuff," Chloe admitted one afternoon, as she showed her parents one of her latest paintings. Vanessa smiled, admiring the vibrant colors and intricate details of Chloe's work. "Your art is beautiful, Chloe. You have a gift, and the world deserves to see it." With her parents' encouragement, Chloe agreed to submit her work to the exhibit. On the day of the event, as students and parents wandered through the gallery, Chloe watched nervously from the sidelines, unsure of how her art would be received. But as people stopped to admire her paintings, offering compliments, and asking about her process, she felt a sense of validation she hadn't expected. One of the visitors to the exhibit was Professor Reynolds, the board member who had supported the changes at Brookwood. He paused in front of one of Chloe's paintings, studying it carefully. "This is remarkable," he said, turning to Chloe with a smile. "You have a real talent." Chloe blushed, feeling both proud and shy at the same time. "Thank you. It means a lot." As the evening went on, Chloe realized that she had found her place not just as a student at Brookwood, but as an artist with a voice of her own. The Carter family had been through a storm, but they had come out stronger on the other side. With the lawsuit behind them and Brookwood Academy on a new path, they were ready to focus on what mattered most to each other. One summer evening, the family gathered in their backyard for a barbecue, a tradition they had started before the chaos of the lawsuit had consumed their lives. The smell of grilled food filled the air as they laughed and talked, enjoying the simple pleasure of being together. Jasmine and Chloe sat on the patio, reminiscing about their first day at Brookwood and how much had changed since then. "I never thought we'd get through all of that," Jasmine said, sipping lemonade. "But here we are." Chloe nodded, her eyes softening. "I'm glad we didn't give up. It was hard, but we made it." Ethan joined them, holding a plate of burgers and hot dogs. He smiled at his daughters, pride radiating from him. "You two are the strongest people I know. You fought for what was right, and you made a difference." Vanessa, carrying a bowl of salad, sat down beside Ethan. She placed a hand on his arm, her expression filled with love and gratitude. "We all made a difference, and we did it together." As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the backyard, the Carters sat around the table eating and laughing. The weight of the past year finally lifted. They knew that there would always be challenges ahead, but they were ready to face them together. That night, as Jasmine and Chloe sat outside, looking up at the stars, they reflected on how far they had come. They had been tested in ways they never could have imagined, but they had emerged stronger, more confident, and more certain of their place in the world. "I think we're going to be okay," Chloe said softly, her gaze fixed on the sky. Jasmine smiled, her heart full. "Yeah, we're going to be just fine." Months after the lawsuit had ended, the Carter family continued to move forward, both personally and professionally. Ethan's proposed bill on educational reform was gaining momentum in Congress, with support from lawmakers across the political spectrum. The bill aimed to establish nationwide guidelines for private school admissions, ensuring that no student would be discriminated against based on race, socioeconomic status, or background. On the day of the vote, Ethan stood in the Senate chamber, addressing his colleagues with the same passion that had driven him throughout the Brookwood case. "This bill is about fairness," he said, his voice steady but powerful. "It's about giving every child a fair shot at success. It's about ensuring that no student is ever told they don't belong because of the color of their skin. We've come a long way, but we still have work to do. And it starts here, with this bill." As the vote was cast, the bill passed with overwhelming support, marking a major victory in the fight for educational equity. Ethan, standing in the Senate chamber, allowed himself a moment of quiet pride. The fight was far from over, but this was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, Vanessa continued to work on cases related to racial discrimination, using her platform to advocate for families facing similar challenges. She became a mentor to young lawyers, sharing her knowledge and experience to help them navigate the complexities of civil rights law. For Jasmine and Chloe, life at Brookwood had settled into a new normal. They continued to thrive academically, but they also made time for the things they loved: debating, painting, and building friendships with students from all walks of life. One afternoon, as the sisters sat in the school library, Chloe looked up from her sketchbook and smiled at Jasmine. "Do you ever think about what would have happened if we hadn't fought back?" Chloe asked. Jasmine thought for a moment, then shook her head. "I don't like to think about that. What matters is that we did fight, and because of that, everything changed." Chloe nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "We should be proud of that." "We are," Jasmine said, her voice filled with certainty. "We made a difference." As the sisters packed up their things and headed out of the library, they knew that their fight had been worth it. They had faced adversity and come out stronger, and they had helped pave the way for a future where every student, regardless of race or background, could walk through the doors of opportunity with their head held high. The road ahead was long, but the Carters were ready for it. Thank you so much for following the Carter family's journey to justice and equality. If you enjoyed this story and want to hear more about powerful narratives that challenge society, inspire change, and explore the human experience, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss out on new content. Together, we can continue to share stories that matter. See you in the next one. The police are on their way, Derek. You've lost. Derek's eyes darted around, realizing for the first time that the entire street was watching him. His bravado faltered, his shoulders tensing as he took in the growing crowd of neighbors, all standing together in a show of solidarity. For a moment, it seemed like Derek might lash out, might do something reckless. But then slowly, the fight drained out of him. His fists unclenched, his shoulders slumped, and with one last look at Edith filled with hatred and resentment, he turned and stormed back to his car. The street was silent as Derek sped away, his tires screeching against the pavement. Edith's breath came in shallow gasps, her heart still racing from the confrontation. She stood there for a moment, frozen, until Bill crossed the street and stood beside her. "You okay, Edith?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. Edith nodded, though her legs still felt shaky. "I'm okay," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thanks to all of you." Bill smiled warmly, giving her a reassuring nod. "We're not going to let him hurt you, Edith. Not now, not ever." Edith's eyes filled with tears, but they weren't tears of fear, they were tears of gratitude. She had been afraid for so long, but now, standing here with her neighbors by her side, she felt a renewed sense of strength. She wasn't alone. In the days following the final confrontation with Derek, the neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the sense of fear that had once gripped Cedar Street began to dissipate. Derek hadn't returned, and Edith had received word from the police that he was being closely monitored. They had issued a restraining order, preventing Derek from coming within a certain distance of Edith's home or the shelter where Rachel and the girls were staying. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was enough to give Edith peace of mind for now. Rachel called regularly, checking in to see how Edith was doing and updating her on their progress. The shelter had helped her find legal representation, and she was working towards securing full custody of the girls and filing for divorce from Derek. It was a long, difficult road, but Rachel was determined to keep moving forward. "The girls are adjusting," Rachel said during one phone call, her voice sounding stronger, more confident. "They're starting to sleep better, and we're getting used to our new routine. It's still hard sometimes, but I feel like we're finally free." Edith smiled, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel. She had come so far, and though there were still challenges ahead, Edith knew that Rachel had the strength to face them. "I'm so proud of you," Edith said softly. "You're doing such a good job, Rachel. You and the girls are going to be just fine." Rachel hesitated for a moment, then her voice softened. "We couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You saved us. I'll never be able to thank you enough for everything you've done." Tears welled in Edith's eyes, and she wiped them away with a smile. "You're family now, Rachel, and family takes care of each other." As Edith hung up the phone, a sense of calm settled over her. She had faced her fears, stood up to Derek, and helped Rachel and the girls escape a dangerous situation. It hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Her home, once a place of quiet solitude, had become a symbol of strength and resilience. And her neighbors' strangers had become a community, united by a shared sense of purpose. Life on Cedar Street would never be the same again, but that was okay. Because now it is filled with hope, connection, and the promise of a better future. Edith smiled as she stepped out into her garden, the late afternoon sun casting a warm glow over the roses. She knelt down, her hands gently tending to the flowers, feeling the cool earth beneath her fingertips. There was still work to be done, but now she knew she wasn't doing it alone. In the weeks that followed Derek's final confrontation, a new sense of peace settled over Cedar Street. The neighborhood watch remained vigilant, but the need for constant worry had lessened as Derek's presence faded from their lives. He hadn't returned, and the restraining order kept him at a safe distance from Edith's home and from the shelter where Rachel and the girls were living. Edith found herself breathing easier with each passing day, the weight of fear slowly lifting from her shoulders. One crisp autumn morning, as Edith was pruning her roses, she heard the familiar ring of her phone from inside the house. She wiped her hands on her gardening apron and hurried to answer it, her heart lifting when she saw Rachel's name on the caller ID. "Rachel, it's so good to hear from you," Edith said, a smile spreading across her face as she held the phone to her ear. "Hi, Edith," Rachel replied, her voice filled with warmth. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything." "Not at all, dear. Just tending to the garden. How are you and the girls doing?" Rachel let out a small sigh, though it was one of relief rather than stress. "We're doing really well, actually. The girls are starting to settle in at school, and they're making new friends. We've been staying at the shelter for a while now, but I've been working with a caseworker. And, well, we found a place. It's a small apartment, but it's ours." Edith's heart swelled with joy at the news. "Rachel, that's wonderful. I'm so happy for you. I couldn't have done it without your help, Edith." "Really? I mean it. You were there for me when I didn't know what to do. You'll never be able to thank you enough." "You've already thanked me more than enough, Rachel," Edith said gently. "I'm just glad you and the girls are safe and moving forward." "We are," Rachel agreed, her voice steady. "We still have some hard days, but we're starting to rebuild. I'm learning how to live without looking over my shoulder all the time. The girls, they've been through so much, but I think they're going to be okay." Edith felt a tear slip down her cheek, and she wiped it away with a smile. "You're an incredible mother, Rachel. You've given them the chance to have a better life, and that's the most important thing." "Thank you," Rachel whispered, her voice filled with emotion. "I wanted to ask, would you like to come visit us when we're settled into the apartment? The girls miss you, and I'd love for you to see our new place." "I'd love that," Edith replied without hesitation. "I can't wait to see how far you've come." After they said their goodbyes, Edith stood in the quiet of her kitchen, a deep sense of pride and peace settling over her. She had been part of something important, helping Rachel and her daughters escape a dangerous situation and start a new life. Knowing that they were safe and thriving gave Edith a sense of fulfillment she hadn't felt in a long time. But Edith also knew that healing wasn't just for Rachel and the girls. She too had been deeply affected by everything that had happened. For so long, Edith had lived in a world of solitude, wrapped in the memories of her past life with Richard. But now she realized that she had the power to create new connections, to make a difference in the lives of others. Her small, quiet world had expanded in ways she never could have predicted. A few weeks later, Edith stood in front of the door to Rachel's new apartment, her heart racing with anticipation. She held a basket filled with homemade cookies and a small potted plant, a housewarming gift for Rachel and the girls. As she knocked on the door, she couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement and pride. Rachel had taken such brave steps toward building a new life for herself and her daughters, and Edith was eager to see the progress they had made. The door opened, and there stood Rachel, her face lighting up with a wide smile. "Edith, you made it." "Of course I did," Edith replied warmly, stepping inside and hugging Rachel. "I wouldn't miss this for the world." The apartment was small but cozy, filled with the warmth and light that Edith had come to associate with Rachel. The walls were adorned with colorful artwork, some drawn by Lily and Ivy, and the space felt alive with the energy of a family building something new. Edith smiled as she took it all in, her heart swelling with pride for Rachel's resilience. "Look who's here!" Rachel called out. And moments later, Lily and Ivy came bounding into the room, their faces bright with excitement. "Grandma Edith!" they exclaimed in unison, rushing toward her and wrapping their arms around her. Edith laughed, bending down to hug the girls. "Oh, my dears, it's so good to see you." "We missed you," Ivy said, her voice small but filled with warmth. "Can you stay for dinner?" "I wouldn't dream of leaving before dinner," Edith replied, her heart swelling with affection for the girls. As they settled into the living room, Rachel brought out a pot of tea, and the four of them spent the afternoon catching up, laughing, and sharing stories. The girls proudly showed Edith their artwork, and Rachel talked about how they were adjusting to their new school and making friends. "They're doing so well," Rachel said, her voice filled with relief and pride. "I wasn't sure how they would handle all the changes, but they've been so strong. I'm so proud of them." "You should be proud of yourself too," Edith said gently. "You've created a safe, loving home for them. That's everything." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with tears of gratitude. I still can't believe we made it. There were times when I thought we'd never get out, but now we have a chance at a real life." As the afternoon turned into evening, the conversation grew deeper, and Edith and Rachel found themselves reflecting on everything that had happened over the past few months. There had been so much pain, fear, and uncertainty, but now there was also hope. They had made it through the storm, and now they were standing on the other side, ready to rebuild their lives. "I never thought I'd feel free," Rachel admitted quietly, her voice heavy with emotion. "But now I wake up every morning knowing that I'm safe, that my girls are safe. And that's everything." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "You deserve this peace, Rachel. You and the girls deserve all the happiness in the world." Rachel nodded, her eyes filled with gratitude. "And you deserve it too, Edith. You've been through so much yourself. You've given us a new start, and I hope you know how much that means to me." Edith smiled, her heart full. "We've given each other a new start." Later that evening, after dinner, and one last round of hugs from Lily and Ivy, Edith said her goodbyes and made her way back to her own home. As she walked down the quiet street, she felt a deep sense of contentment. Life had changed in ways she never could have predicted, but it was better, now richer, fuller, and filled with new connections. Rachel and the girls had become like family to her, and Edith knew that their bond would only grow stronger as they continued to support one another in the days ahead. As the autumn leaves began to fall and the air turned crisp, Edith found herself spending more time in her garden, reflecting on the past few months. So much had changed, not just for Rachel and the girls, but for Edith as well. Her life, once quiet and isolated, had been transformed by the relationships she had built and the strength she had discovered within herself. But with that transformation came a deeper understanding of the weight she had been carrying for so long: grief, the loneliness, the sense of being left behind. Richard's death had left a hole in Edith's life, one that she had tried to fill with routine and solitude. But now, with Rachel and the girls in her life, Edith realized that she didn't have to carry that weight alone anymore. One afternoon, as Edith sat in the garden with a cup of tea, she found herself thinking about Richard. She missed him every day, missed his laugh, his warmth, the way he had always made her feel safe and loved. But for the first time in a long time, Edith felt a sense of peace when she thought of him, peace in knowing that he would have been proud of her for everything she had done to help Rachel and the girls. As she sipped her tea, Edith decided it was time to visit Richard's grave. She hadn't been in a while, and she felt a strong pull to go to tell him about everything that had happened, about the new life she had found after all these years. The next day, Edith drove to the cemetery where Richard was buried. The drive was quiet, the fall colors painting the landscape in shades of gold and red. When she arrived, Edith made her way to Richard's headstone, a small smile on her face as she placed a bouquet of fresh roses at his grave. "Hello, love," she said softly, her voice filled with affection. "It's been a while, but I've been busy. I have so much to tell you." For the next hour, Edith sat by Richard's grave, telling him about Rachel, about the girls, about everything that had happened since they had moved into the neighborhood. She talked about how she had found new strength within herself, how she had made new friends, and how she had learned that it was never too late to make a difference in someone's life. "I think you'd be proud of me," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I know I've still got a lot of life left to live, and I'm going to make the most of it. I'll carry your love with me, always." As Edith stood to leave, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. She knew that Richard was still with her, in spirit, and that his love would continue to guide her in the days ahead. She wasn't alone. Not anymore. As the winter holidays approached, Cedar Street came alive with the warm glow of twinkling lights and the festive spirit of the season. Edith, who had once dreaded the long, lonely winter months, now found herself filled with a sense of anticipation and joy. The neighborhood had changed so much in the past few months, and Edith felt more connected to her community than ever before. Rachel and the girls had invited Edith to spend Christmas with them in their new apartment, and Edith had gladly accepted. It was a far cry from the quiet, solitary holidays she had spent in years past, and she was looking forward to celebrating with people she cared about. On Christmas Eve, Edith arrived at Rachel's apartment with a basket full of gifts and homemade treats. The girls greeted her at the door, their faces bright with excitement, and Edith couldn't help but laugh as they pulled her inside. "We've been waiting for you," Lily exclaimed, her eyes sparkling with joy. Mom made hot chocolate. Edith's heart swelled with affection as she followed the girls into the cozy living room where Rachel was waiting with a warm smile. The apartment was decorated with twinkling lights and a small Christmas tree, and the air was filled with the comforting scent of cinnamon and pine. "Welcome, Edith," Rachel said, hugging her tightly. "We're so glad you're here." "I wouldn't want to be anywhere else," Edith replied, her voice full of warmth. As they sat together by the fire, sipping hot chocolate and exchanging stories, Edith felt a deep sense of contentment. This was what she had been missing for so long, a sense of connection, of belonging, of family. The evening passed in a blur of laughter, conversation, and warmth. The girls opened their presents with wide-eyed excitement, and Edith marveled at how far they had come since the dark days of living under Derek's control. They were happy, healthy, and full of life, and Edith knew that Rachel had done an incredible job of creating a safe, loving home for them. Later that night, after the girls had gone to bed, Rachel and Edith sat together by the fire, reflecting on everything that had happened over the past year. "It feels like a lifetime ago," Rachel said quietly, her eyes focused on the flickering flames. "Sometimes I still can't believe we made it out." "But we did." "You did," Edith corrected gently. "You found the strength to leave, and now you and the girls have a bright future ahead of you." Rachel smiled, her eyes glistening with gratitude. "I couldn't have done it without you, Edith. You were there when I needed someone the most, and I'll never forget that." Edith reached out and took Rachel's hand, squeezing it gently. "We've been there for each other, and we'll keep being there, no matter what comes next." As they sat together in the quiet of the night, Edith felt a deep sense of peace settling over her. The storm was over, and now it was time to move forward to embrace the future with open arms, knowing that they had all found the strength to survive and thrive. And in that moment, Edith knew that everything would be all right. Thank you for following along with Edith's emotional and inspiring journey. If you found this story moving or relatable, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss out on more powerful stories like this. We'll be bringing you more heartwarming tales of resilience, community, and the strength of the human spirit. And don't forget to click the notification bell so you'll always be the first to know when new content is available. We value your feedback, so if you enjoyed this story, leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for being part of our storytelling community, and stay tuned for more stories that remind us all that no matter how hard things get, we are never truly alone.